She screeched at me from the sidewalk like I was some feral raccoon who just crawled out of a hole and made a nest on her lawn. You can't just live there. That property's abandoned. Karen, the self-appointed sheriff of suburbia, had 3 things on her that morning: a pearl-pink jogging suit, a bedazzled water bottle, and an outrageously inflated sense of authority. I'd barely had time to set one box down on the porch when she stormed up with her yappy little Pomeranian, whose bark sounded like a balloon squealing its last breath. "I'm calling the HOA," she snapped. "This is trespassing. And if they don't act, I will call the police." She emphasized each word like she was casting a spell. To be fair, I did look out of place, wearing a dusty cap, scuffed boots, and unloading plain brown boxes into a clearly neglected colonial-style home on a street where people pressure-wash their driveways like they were competing in a suburb Olympic. But what Karen didn't know, what she really didn't know, was that I wasn't moving into an abandoned house. I was auditing it, and the only reason I hadn't shown her my badge yet was because I wanted to see just how deep her delusion ran. I'd been on assignment for less than an hour. Technically, the house belonged to the Bureau of Land Management, tied up in an obscure federal asset forfeiture case after its previous owner, a white-collar tax evader with a yacht named No Receipt, fled to the Caymans. My job was simple: catalog the property, check for squatters, and monitor it quietly before the agency figured out what to do with it. No sirens, no drama. Just a clipboard, a body cam, and a few days of boring reports. But Karen had other plans. Within minutes of her first screamfest, 3 more neighbors peeked out from their windows like prairie dogs spooked by a coyote. One guy even took out his phone. "She's got another one," he muttered to his wife, sipping coffee like this was the morning news. "Another what?" I asked deadpan. "Squatter," he whispered. "Last year she tried to evict the Amazon driver because he took a picture of her house by accident. That should have been my cue to flash my badge and shut this circus down, but there was something morbidly fascinating about Karen's unraveling. She paced around the sidewalk, talking into her Apple Watch like it was a CB radio. "Yes, he's setting up furniture. He's got boxes. Probably meth ingredients." Her voice had that nasal intensity that could drill holes in drywall. "No, I don't see a U-Haul, which is even more suspicious. Who moves without a truck?" I considered giving her a dramatic line, something like, "Lady, I am the government," but I decided to wait. She needed a little rope first. Karen strutted right up to the property line like she owned the place and pointed at the crumbling porch. "This house has been empty for 2 years, she barked. "It's a hazard. The HOA has already voted on it. You're trespassing, and I've got photos." I blinked slowly. "You mean the same HOA that let a moldy playground slide collapse behind the tennis courts?" I asked calmly. She flinched. "That's being replaced next fiscal quarter," she snapped. "After we finish repainting the tennis net. Don't change the subject." Her logic had more holes than Swiss cheese left on a sidewalk in July. I kept unloading. That's when she crossed the threshold. Literally. Karen stepped onto the porch, stood between me and the doorway, and puffed up like a cornered cat. "You need to leave now or I will perform a citizen's arrest." I genuinely thought she was joking, until she pulled out a pair of plastic zip ties. Not regulation cuffs. Not even rope. Zip ties. The kind you buy in a discount hardware bin next to expired batteries. I almost choked on my own amusement. "You going to detain me in front of the azaleas?" I asked. She didn't flinch. Her dog, sensing chaos, growled at my ankles like it could take me down with a single bite to the shin. At that point, I was done playing nice. I pulled out my ID and held it up to her face. Government seal, laminated, serial number, everything. Her eyes narrowed as she read it, lips moving like she needed to sound out the words. "Federal Asset Recovery Division?" she finally said, sounding like she'd just been told unicorns were real. "You're with the government?" Her tone shifted instantly from accusatory to alarmed. "Why didn't you say so?" I smiled politely. "You never asked. You assumed." Then you threaten me with zip ties. To Karen's credit, she didn't faint. She just backed up slowly like someone defusing a live bomb. Her Pomeranian, sensing the mood shift, yipped once and then peed on her sneaker. The sidewalk audience grew. The guy with the coffee whispered, "Oh no, she's melting," and I had to fight not to laugh. But of course, it didn't end there. This was Karen we were talking about. That afternoon, she filed a formal complaint to the HOA stating that a government operative was impersonating a squatter in order to seize neighborhood property under false pretenses. The letter included hand-drawn diagrams, a spreadsheet of made-up zoning codes, and, somehow, a blurry photo of me that made me look like I was mid-sneeze. HOA board president Marcia called me herself. "She does this," Marcia groaned. "She tried to report a city arborist for stealing trees." "You're fine. Want us to tell her to back off?" I politely declined. I wasn't done with Karen yet. The more she escalated, the more useful the footage became for internal training. Besides, this was getting fun. By the next day, Karen had gone full tinfoil hat. She started patrolling the block with a clipboard, taking photos of suspicious license plates, and putting up passive-aggressive flyers warning of federal entrapment schemes. Her latest theory was that the Bureau had planted me here to seize neighborhood homes under eminent domain. One flyer even included a hand-drawn sketch of me labeled Agent McFakename, with the word "Beware" in red marker across the bottom. The best part? I hadn't even unpacked the upstairs rooms yet. Now I was starting to wonder how far she'd go. Would she try to bribe me? Frame me? Try to sneak into the house? Karen's brand of suburban madness wasn't just entertaining, it was dangerously unpredictable. And I had a front-row seat. By the third day, Karen's paranoia had officially upgraded from neighborhood nuisance to community theater. She'd organized a safety patrol, consisting of herself, her spineless husband Doug, and a teenager who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else but had been bribed with gift cards. They marched in tight formation, clipboards, neon vests, matching fanny packs, like they were training for an HOA-hosted reenactment of Homeland Security. Doug tried to maintain some dignity, but his primary job seemed to be holding the dog while Karen monologued into her phone about citizen sovereignty and suspicious government assets. I watched from the porch with my morning coffee, a calm spectator to the absolute unraveling of her mind. The best part? She still didn't know the house was government-owned. My badge may have shut her up temporarily, but Karen couldn't stand not having the final word. Her new plan, as far as I could piece together from her loud phone conversations, was to prove the house wasn't actually federal property, and then use some bizarre homeowner's bylaw to seize it for communal development. I almost respected the delusion. Almost. Mid-morning, she sent Doug over with a letter, hand-delivered in an envelope that still had a Hallmark sticker on the back. It was a printed notice of violation, citing 7 made-up infractions, including failure to display a mailbox flag, residing in a structure zoned for restoration, and my personal favorite, posing as a non-resident occupant with potential malicious intent. Doug, clearly uncomfortable, handed it to me without making eye contact. "She typed it herself," he muttered, then shuffled back across the street like a defeated courier. I kept the letter. I was building a file. If this turned into something actionable, it would make a great training scenario for the Bureau. How to handle civilian overreach, the HOA Karen incident. But I also had a plan. I'd been passive long enough. It was time to start nudging the game. That afternoon, I started making phone calls, loud ones, on the porch. Just enough to make sure Karen could hear me through her open windows across the street. "Yeah, we'll need a full equipment sweep," I said, pacing like a man with secrets. "I want everything cataloged. Basement wiring, attic insulation, especially any water damage in the crawlspace. Might be code violations." I threw in a few references to environmental studies and mold remediation to really twist the knife. Karen emerged 20 minutes later holding a notepad and trying not to look obvious. I gave her a little wave and watched her retreat like a roach from a flashlight. By the next morning, 3 cars from the county utility office had arrived on the block. Not for Karen. Not for me. Just scheduled maintenance down the road. But that didn't stop her from spinning it into a full-scale government invasion. She started recording them from her lawn, narrating like she was live-streaming the fall of a regime. "They're checking the electrical grid," she whispered to her dog. "Which means they're testing electromagnetic surveillance nodes. That's how they track you." The poor utility guy tried to explain they were just inspecting transformers, but Karen wasn't having it. She kept asking for his creds, and whether his van had a Faraday cage. I couldn't make this up if I tried. Later that day, Karen filed another formal complaint with the HOA, this time accusing me of weaponizing federal resources to intimidate residents. Her evidence? My loud phone call and the fact that I wore sunglasses at all hours, which apparently indicated covert operations. The board's response was a polite but firm statement. They had verified my clearance and authority and would no longer be entertaining unsubstantiated claims. Karen did not take that well. That night, she put a sign on her lawn. A literal yard sign. It said, "Danger, Federal Activity Zone. Government trespassers unwelcome." It had an eagle drawn in crayon. Around this point, Marcia from the HOA gave me a call. I was expecting another apology, but instead, she asked if I was free for coffee. "Off the record," she said. "You've become quite the spectacle." I met her at the local cafe, Neutral Ground, and learned more in 20 minutes than I had all week. Karen had been the HOA president for a single term 5 years ago. Her reign ended after she tried to ban ornamental garden gnomes because she believed they glorified paganism. Since then, she'd clung to what scraps of power she had left, positioning herself as a one-woman watchdog with too much time and too little reality. The board tolerated her mostly out of exhaustion. Marcia's real reason for reaching out? She wanted me to stay. "You're the first thing that's distracted her from installing motion sensors in everyone's trash bins," she said, dead serious. "This is the calmest month we've had in years." I left with a free muffin and a bizarre sense of community purpose. Back at the house, I found Karen crouched near my front hedges with a tape measure and a small level. I opened the door. She froze. "Checking slope compliance," she blurted. "Those hedges encroach by nearly 4 inches. That's technically a violation." "Violation of what?" I asked. "Basic geometry?" She stood up stiffly, brushed invisible dirt off her pants, and tried to compose herself. "I'll be submitting a formal boundary complaint," she said. I smiled. "Please do. I'm documenting everything too." The next morning, I beat her to the punch. I hung a sign of my own. It read, "Federal property, do not trespass, surveillance in use." It was accurate. It was legal. And it was deliciously visible from Karen's kitchen window. She spent the next hour pacing her lawn like a zoo animal whose exhibit had been remodeled. That afternoon, she showed up with Doug again. He had a tiny camcorder from 2004 and looked like he regretted all his life choices. "We're legally allowed to film from public areas," Karen said, her voice shaky but defiant. "You can't stop us." "I'm not stopping you," I said, sipping my iced tea. "But just so you know, every second of this is also going in my report. And the house is rigged with enough internal cameras to make a YouTube vlogger blush." Karen looked like she'd swallowed a lemon whole. That night, she broke. I heard the screaming through my kitchen wall. Doug yelling something about getting a grip and just let it go already, followed by a door slam and the unmistakable sound of someone sobbing into a decorative pillow. I should have felt bad. But I didn't. Because I knew she wasn't done. Karen wasn't the type to lose gracefully. She was the kind to double down. And the next morning she did just that, by calling in a private investigator. He showed up in an ill-fitting suit and a fedora, holding a manila envelope like it contained state secrets. The PI looked like he'd stepped out of a low-budget noir film and wandered into the wrong decade. His blazer was 2 sizes too big, his mustache was glued on crooked, or at least it looked that way, and his clipboard had a coffee stain so large it looked like an ink blot test. He introduced himself as Mr. Franklin. Just Franklin, which I'm sure sounded cool in his head. I watched from the porch as he approached, flanked by Karen and Doug, who looked like a hostage holding the Pomeranian as a buffer against reality. Mr. Franklin is a licensed investigator, Karen announced with the smug pride of someone who had just summoned legal reinforcements in a Monopoly game. He's going to get to the bottom of this little property situation. She used air quotes like they were punctuation. Franklin adjusted his tie, which was floral and clearly not intended for field work, and said, "This'll just take a few questions. Mind if I ask who you really are?" I tilted my head. "You mean aside from the identity I already showed you?" I reached slowly into my pocket and held up the badge again. Government Property Recovery Unit. Division 6. Franklin squinted. "Karen says that badge could be fake." "And what do you say?" I asked, sipping my coffee with absolute composure. "Well," he said, flipping through papers that weren't even clipped together, "I think it's suspicious that no one's seen the deed, the title transfer, or any real estate filings. There's no sale on record, no rental agreement, and the mailbox was empty for years. The house, well, frankly, it looks abandoned." He gave a smug little smirk like he'd cracked the zodiac cipher. I sighed. "That's because it is abandoned. It's not on the market because it's not privately owned. It was seized by the federal government under asset forfeiture. This isn't a real estate transaction. This is inventory." Franklin blinked. "You're saying the government owns it?" "Yes," I said slowly, as if teaching a toddler the concept of rain. "Temporarily. And I'm here to assess, catalog, and monitor it until legal resolution." "That's it." Karen jumped in, waving a laminated piece of paper. "But according to the HOA charter," she said, stabbing the document dramatically, "no residence within Oak Ridge Meadows may remain uninhabited for longer than 730 consecutive days without triggering a forfeiture clause." She said it like she expected lightning to crash behind her. I raised an eyebrow. "That clause is about properties owned by HOA members, Karen. Not government holdings. That charter has as much jurisdiction over me as it does over a NASA launch pad." That hit her harder than I expected. She faltered for a moment, mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping on a dock. Doug muttered something about needing to walk the dog and took off. Franklin looked from her to me and back again, then tried a last-ditch play. "Could I see your paperwork? Just for verification purposes." "Absolutely," I said, reaching for the folder I kept in the entry table. I handed him the cover sheet from the Department of Justice, complete with an embossed seal, legal language, and case number. I even threw in a copy of the federal statute on asset seizures. He looked at it, paled, and handed it back like it was radioactive. "Well, that all seems to be in order." Karen's face was a shifting storm cloud, shock, denial, outrage, humiliation, all competing for dominance. She tried one more swing. "Then why haven't you cleaned it up? It's a blight. That porch is collapsing, the lawn's overgrown, and there's a broken shutter on the second floor. The HOA has every right to fine you for deterioration." "That's cute," I said. "But unfortunately for you, federal property doesn't answer to HOA bylaws. And you can't fine the government. You can try. You can send us a letter with a sternly worded invoice. But it'll go into a folder marked, 'Do not respond.'" Karen's hand clenched so tightly around her laminated charter that it crinkled. She turned on her heel and stormed back across the street. Franklin offered me a half-hearted nod and followed, mumbling something about billable hours. I didn't see him again. But Karen wasn't done. That evening, she started posting on the neighborhood Facebook group. Her first message was titled, "Possible Deep State Activity in Oak Ridge." I couldn't read it directly. Someone tipped me off, but according to screenshots a friendly neighbor sent anonymously, she claimed the government was implanting agents in abandoned homes to conduct electromagnetic surveillance on suburban families. She warned parents to keep their children away from the compromised structure, and referred to me only as the occupant, like I was a ghost story told around the HOA fire pit. Soon after, kids started daring each other to run up to my porch and ring the bell. One even left a note that said, "Blink once if you're being held hostage by aliens." I left a bowl of candy on the steps the next night with a sign, "For Area 51 trainees only." The next morning, Karen took a photo of it and posted again, claiming the candy was laced with mind control drugs developed by DARPA. I laughed harder than I had in years. Meanwhile, Doug, the poor man, started coming home later and later, sometimes driving around the block a few extra times before pulling into the driveway. One evening I saw him standing alone on his lawn, holding a cold beer, and staring at nothing in particular, like a man who had been through too many HOA meetings and not enough therapy. I nodded at him. He nodded back. It was the most honest conversation either of us had that week. The final straw came when Karen tried to serve me an eviction notice. She printed it on pink paper, signed it herself, Karen Lynn Jeffries, representative of the people, and taped it to my door with glitter washi tape. I peeled it off gently, took a photo, and added it to the file. Then I made a phone call to my supervisor. "This is becoming operationally disruptive," I said. "What are my options?" My supervisor, a patient woman named Lucille who had dealt with everything from armed cult standoffs to angry senators, sighed deeply. "Do you want us to pull you out?" "No," I said. "I want clearance to escalate within policy. Just enough to shut her down." Meaning I'd like to bring in some backup. Quietly. "Make it clear I'm not here alone." Lucille paused. "Approved. But no showboating." "Wouldn't dream of it," I said. And I didn't. Not really. The next morning, I invited a few colleagues to swing by in an unmarked SUV. 3 agents in clean suits stepped out, took a leisurely walk around the house, nodded, took notes, and left. No sirens. No confrontation. But it was enough. Karen stood frozen on her lawn, mouth agape, eyes flicking between the SUV and my house like she was watching a season finale cliffhanger. An hour later, her "Danger. Federal Activity" sign was gone. The Facebook post stopped. Doug mowed the lawn with the resigned peace of a man who knew the storm had passed. I'd won the battle. But the war wasn't over. Because I knew Karen. And I knew her next move was going to be desperate, delusional, and spectacular. I thought she'd cracked. I thought after the sign came down and the Facebook rants stopped, Karen would retreat into quiet humiliation and maybe take up a new hobby, like therapy. But I underestimated the depth of her self-righteousness. Silence, it turns out, was not surrender. It was preparation. A full week passed with no word from her, and honestly, I started to relax. I made real progress cataloging the house, cleared the backyard of brush, and even found some weird hidden stash in the attic, old burner phones and notebooks stuffed with financial gibberish, a clear trail of whatever scam the former owner had been running. I boxed it up for evidence. Work was finally, blessedly normal. Then came Friday. The day started with an odd hum. Not electrical, not mechanical, more like the low, menacing sound of self-importance. I opened the door and saw it. A podium. On Karen's lawn. With a microphone. 2 folding chairs had been set up facing the street, and a row of hand-painted signs was staked into the grass behind her, fluttering in the breeze like protest art from a dystopian preschool. They said things like, "Expose the occupant," "Property rights equals human rights," and "Government Geo Home." She was holding a press conference. Doug stood off to the side, arms crossed, trying to disappear into his own spine. Karen tapped the mic like she was about to accept an Oscar. "Neighbors," she began, voice trembling with purpose, "we are gathered today to confront the erosion of our constitutional liberties. There is a stranger among us. A stranger who hides behind badges and bureaucracy. A stranger who has claimed an abandoned home for unclear, possibly illegal purposes. I leaned against the doorway and sipped my coffee, watching like I'd paid for front row seat. Karen continued, I have gathered evidence. She held up a folder dramatically. That suggests this man is not a lawful occupant, but part of a covert experiment in federal overreach. I have submitted Freedom of Information Act requests, 2 of them, and have been stonewalled. That is not transparency. That is tyranny. A teenager biking by slowed down to watch. One of the folding chairs remained empty. I'm pretty sure it was meant for a local reporter who wisely never showed. Karen didn't care. She had momentum. I am hereby forming the Oak Ridge Committee for Constitutional Oversight, she declared. We demand answers. We demand jurisdiction. And we will not rest until this house is under HOA supervision once again. Doug tried to clap. 1 week, slow clap. Then stop. By the time she wrapped up, after quoting both Ben Franklin and Oprah Winfrey out of context, I was already on the phone with Lucille again. You're not going to believe this, I said. She did. She always did. We might need to consider local escalation if she keeps drawing attention, I warned. If this spills onto social media, we'll have TikTokers live streaming my lawn within hours. Lucille chuckled. Permission granted. Keep it clean. So I made a plan. Karen wanted attention? I'd give it to her. But not the way she wanted. Saturday morning, I invited the real estate division from the bureau to visit. They brought cameras, drones. Not for intimidation, just standard documentation. But it looked impressive. When the SUVs pulled up, Karen scrambled outside in her robe, screaming at Doug to get the GoPro. She shouted at the agents, demanding they show her documents. They ignored her. The drone buzzed overhead, scanning roof damage. She threw a gardening glove at it. Missed by a mile. Then I brought out the real hammer. I stood on the porch, voice raised just enough to carry. Just to clarify for anyone watching, this home was legally seized under federal asset forfeiture laws after the previous owner was indicted for money laundering, wire fraud, and embezzlement. The individual in question fled the country, abandoning this property. It is now under the custody of the Department of Justice until further legal proceedings are concluded. Karen froze mid-shriek. And yes, I added, all activity here is protected under Title 21, Section 881 of the U.S. Code. Any interference with that process can be prosecuted as obstruction of federal operations. Doug dropped the GoPro. The street went dead silent. A couple who had been jogging literally stopped in place. Karen stood there, robe flapping in the breeze, expression collapsing under the weight of reality. She tried one last deflection. Then why does it look so run down if it's federal? I smiled. Because our priority is evidence, not landscaping. But don't worry, cleanup starts Monday. Karen staggered back inside. No protest signs came out that evening. No Facebook posts. No podium. But I wasn't celebrating yet. Not until I saw the final move. It came Monday. I was working in the garage, boxing up more files for evidence, when I heard tires on gravel. A large white van pulled into her driveway. Lettering on the side read, Jeffrey's Investigative Media Solutions. I peered around the corner. Karen had hired a documentary crew. Out came 3 kids with cheap cameras and a boom mic held together with duct tape. One had a drone strapped to his back. Karen posed dramatically on her porch, wrapped in an American flag shawl. Film everything, she instructed. This is the story they don't want you to hear. The lead kid, a wannabe journalist named Clay from the looks of his ironic mustache, asked, Is this about the mole people or the surveillance towers? Karen smiled cryptically. Both. I'd reached my limit. I called Lucille again. Time for the finale, I said. How big? She asked. Big enough to crush the narrative. Do it. The next morning, an official press release was issued from the bureau, A public update on forfeited assets under management, complete with a bullet-point list of properties, including this one, and legal context. It was posted on the federal site, complete with my property's address and a dry, boring explanation of everything I'd already said. But it had a federal watermark, a digital signature, and the golden glow of indisputable truth. I printed copies, laminated them, and personally delivered one to Karen's mailbox with a handwritten note, "In case your documentary needs B-roll." Then came the final blow. That afternoon, a landscaping crew showed up, paid by the Bureau, to begin basic cleanup. New grass sod, shutter replacement, porch reinforcement. Within hours, the house looked semi-respectable, which ruined Karen's entire blighted zone narrative. She came outside, confused and wary, eyes darting between the crew and the clipboard in my hand. "Renovation?" she asked. "Or demolition?" I smiled. "Neither. Preservation. For pending court proceedings." "So what happens now?" she asked, voice small. For the first time, there was no fire in it. Just exhaustion. I shrugged. "Depends. Maybe the house goes to auction. Maybe it gets converted into a federal facility. Could be anything, really. But I'll be gone soon." Her jaw twitched. "You're leaving?" "Eventually. My job's almost done." "And then what?" "Then someone else moves in. Maybe another agent. Maybe a new owner. Someone with the patience to deal with local charm." She didn't respond. She just turned and walked inside, slow and defeated. I stood on the porch for a long moment, watching the sun dip behind her house. The Pomeranian barked once, half-heartedly, from somewhere inside. Then silence. It was over. Or so I thought. The house felt different now. Not just cleaner or quieter, but calmer, like it had finally exhaled after years of chaos. The landscaping crew had done their part and moved on. My job was winding down too. The boxes were packed, the paperwork finalized, and the evidence secured. I'd sent everything to legal, and barring any last-minute drama, I'd be off assignment within the week. For the first time in months, I almost felt like I could breathe. Almost. Because this was Karen. And Karen never let a good defeat go unavenged. The first sign came Tuesday morning. I stepped out to grab coffee and found a new addition to my mailbox. Not a flyer. Not a glittery complaint letter. No, this time it was a glossy brochure, professionally printed and stapled, titled "Exposing the Occupant: The Hidden Dangers of Federal Overreach." Right there on the cover? A zoomed-in, heavily filtered image of me mid-yawn, looking like I'd just woken up in a bunker. Across the top, in huge red font, were the words, "He's still watching US." Inside, the content was pure Karen. Theories about secret surveillance, alleged radiation leaks, drone scans harvesting vital aura data, and a personal essay titled, "Why I Sleep in Foil Pajamas Now." It was an unhinged manifesto masquerading as community journalism. She'd apparently distributed copies to every house on the block. Some even made it to the adjacent neighborhood. I found 3 on the local Starbucks bulletin board alone. When I asked Marcia about it at the HOA office, she just sighed, rubbed her temples and said, "You think this is bad?" Last year she sent everyone a DVD claiming fluoride caused divorce. She glanced up. But at least this time, she spelled all the words right. I should have laughed it off. I wanted to laugh it off. But there was a problem. Karen had started gathering a following. A small one, sure, but enough to matter. 2 or 3 neighbors started asking pointed questions during HOA meetings. People who'd never spoken to her before were suddenly nodding along when she mentioned government intrusion, or the van with the tinted windows. One guy even started wearing a shirt that said, "I'm being watched and I voted for it." It would have been hilarious if it wasn't so absurdly effective. By Thursday, someone knocked on my door. A woman in her 50s, floral dress, clipboard in hand, looking like she sold vitamins out of the trunk of her Prius. "Hi. I'm with the Oak Ridge Liberty Watch," she chirped. We're conducting a survey to determine how many people feel threatened by government surveillance in their own neighborhoods. I stared at her. You do realize this house is under federal custody, right? Oh yes, she said, smiling. That's why we're here. I shut the door. I called Lucille. It's metastasizing, I said. She's not just the HOA pest anymore. She's trying to build a political platform. There was a pause on the line. Then Lucille said, Let her. Excuse me. Let her overreach. People like her always do. The higher she climbs on her little homemade soapbox, the harder she's going to fall. She was right, of course. So I waited. I didn't engage. I didn't react. I just documented. Every flyer, every brochure, every social media post. I forwarded them quietly to our internal council. And then, like fate was personally invested in ending this saga with a bow, Karen did what Karen always does. She went too far. It was a Friday night. I was watching old crime documentaries and drinking decaf when I heard rustling outside, too controlled to be wind, too awkward to be animal. I stepped onto the porch. Nothing. Just the chirping of sprinklers and the rustle of leaves. But then I noticed the side window, propped open, and the back gate unlatched. I grabbed my flashlight and did a slow circuit of the property. I didn't see her at first, but then I caught a glint of something in the bushes. I clicked on the beam. There she was, crouched in my hydrangeas, wearing full camo gear and holding a camcorder like she was auditioning for a nature documentary. She froze like a possum, then scrambled up, snarling, "You can't prove I was trying to break in." "You're on camera," I said, gesturing calmly to the security lights above the door. 3 of them. And a motion sensor. And a body cam. I tapped my shirt. "Say hi." Karen bolted. She made it halfway across her yard before I heard the unmistakable whoop of a siren. Yes, I'd called local police before stepping out. No more warnings. No more conversations. I'd had enough. They arrived in under 5 minutes. 2 officers. Both young, both tired, both clearly very familiar with Karen. I handed over the footage. They didn't even need to ask questions. "We've got her on trespass, unlawful surveillance, and probable harassment," one officer said, taking notes. "Do you want to press charges?" I didn't hesitate. Yes. Karen was hysterical when they cuffed her on the lawn. Not angry, betrayed. "This is a setup," she screamed. "This whole thing is an experiment. You're trying to gaslight the suburbs." I knew it. Her Pomeranian barked like a deflated party horn from inside the house. Doug stood silently at the window, head in his hands. She was still screaming when they drove her away. The next morning, Oak Ridge was eerily quiet. The podium vanished. The protest signs gone. Even the online group, Expose the Occupant, had disappeared. Karen was released on bail within the day, of course, but her credibility never recovered. Marcia sent out a neighborhood-wide email diplomatically asking residents to refrain from unauthorized patrols, public accusations, or shrub-based reconnaissance missions. I stayed 1 more week, tied up final loose ends, and passed the baton to a different division. On my last day, I walked across the street with a 6-pack of decent beer and knocked on Doug's door. He opened it, looked surprised, then silently stepped onto the porch. I handed him the pack. "For surviving," I said. He gave a weary, grateful smile. "I almost joined a commune," he said. "If they had plumbing, I would have gone." We sat in silence for a moment, drinking under the fading evening light. The Pomeranian stared at me from inside like it was weighing its options. Before I left, I handed Doug a folded sheet of paper. "Just so you know, it was real. Everything she accused me of, except the alien radiation stuff. The house is federal. The job was legit. The mission mattered." "I figured," he said. "You were too calm to be fake." He paused. "Will she be okay?" "Eventually," I said. "But it won't be here. She's violated enough codes and ordinances that she's been removed from the HOA board. Temporarily. Indefinitely. Call it what you will." Doug nodded. Thank God. I drove away with the windows down and a sense of catharsis I didn't know I needed. Months of Karen-induced chaos had finally ended. The road unspooled before me like a promise. I didn't know where my next assignment would be, probably a seized trailer in Arizona or a failed crypto mansion in Miami, but I knew this. No matter how ridiculous, no matter how entitled, no matter how over the top someone is, there's always a bigger badge. And it always wins.